How you doing, everyone? Welcome back. Well, you've probably heard about that giant in-person email that Whiskey Pete Kegsbreath, whatever you want to call him, decided to hold with all of the generals and admirals in the United States military, all of them. Plus, there were many command sergeants major there. All right. So, what are we looking at here? We're looking at Secretary of Defense. I am not going to call him the Secretary of War because it is not the Department of War, legally speaking. I don't care what they want to call it. All right, it is legally still the Department of Defense. Right? Just because they want to declare war on United States citizens and United States cities, no, it is not the Department of War. It is the Department of Defense. So, we have a condescending dressing down by a National Guard major of generals, 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star, which for those, and admirals also 1, 2, 3, and 4 stars. For those not in the know, there are two ranks of Rear Admiral. One is 1-star, one is 2 stars. I guess the 1-star is called the Rear Admiral lower half, is my understanding of it, based on, I didn't know this until just now, so bear with me, because I am not familiar with Navy ranks. Okay. Plus whatever their equivalent of the Command Sergeant Major would be. They had a bunch of those there as well. And then Air Force enlisted ranks I am also not familiar with. But they had, their equivalent of Command Sergeants Major there, as well as in the Army, Marine Corps, and Air Force, the ranks of general are Brigadier General, Major General, Lieutenant General, and General, which are 1, 2, 3, and 4 stars respectively. All right, for those not in the know. So all of the generals, all of the admirals, regardless of the number of stars, they have to be there along with their Command Sergeants Major and the equivalent in the Air Force and Navy. And why? Why? So that former National Guard Major Whiskey Pete Kegsbreath can talk down to them, condescend to them. Never mind the fact that, we're talking generals, they often have 30 years or more in their respective branch of the military. Generals and admirals have 30 or more years in service. Command Sergeants Major, likewise, they're 20 to 30 years or more. So, to be talked down to and berated by a guy who, technically outranks them now because he is the Secretary of Defense. Well, despite having, no real leadership responsibilities above being a platoon leader when he was in the Guard. and a Captain Bone Spurs, President of the United States, who always wanted a Purple Heart, but bought his way out of serving. Bought his way out of serving when his number came up in the draft. You know, he didn't even have to wait to be drafted. He could have enlisted, or signed up as an officer. But you know what? He didn't do that. And fine, whatever. I mean, the fact that he got out of the draft and the fact that he didn't serve at all, by itself, not a problem, right? The fact that he got out of the draft and acts like he's the biggest badass who knows more than... He literally said during his first campaign that he knows more than the generals do. No. No. This is the same guy who said about John McCain, he's a hero because he was captured. I like people who weren't captured. Yeah, well, I like presidents who aren't felons. So, whatever. Where was I going with this, right? Whiskey Pete starts talking about standards, right? Which, don't get me wrong, we need to enforce the standards, right? The uniform standards, you know, your grooming standards, you know, for example, there is no way that I would be able to get away with this look in the military, nor should I, right? When I was in, I was clean shaven and I had regulation haircut all the time, except for in deployments when I didn't have access to haircuts or shaving equipment in some, but that was only a temporary thing. You know, I was with a group on top of a mountain in Afghanistan that you know, we weren't shaving up there, right? But other than that, you know, I remained clean shaven and kept a professional military haircut at all times, right? So, you know, for him to mention the grooming standards, yeah, I get it. But then he mentions, you know, no more shaving profiles, which basically what that means is there are some men, actually a large percentage of black men it seems like, but there are some men who shaving regularly damages their skin. So they are exempted from shaving, not completely necessarily, but they do have to maintain, you know, certain standards. They have to keep it well trimmed. You know, they can't have what I've got. You know, so Whiskey Pete wants to get rid of that, and you know, black men are affected by that condition that causes their skin to break out more than white men. That's for sure. I don't know if it's more than any other ethnicity, but I do know it's more than white men. So, no more shaving profiles. So let's limit our black soldiers, huh? Our black service members. You know, he talks about you know, PT standards, physical training for those not familiar with the terminology. The PT standards, you know, where you know, everyone has to meet the male standard, right? Which, okay, because of genetic differences, right? There are varied standards for male and female service members for PT, but there are also varied standards based on age as well, right? So, you get some 24, 25-year-old who is in the prime of his life. His standard is going to be higher than some 40-year-old who's been in for 20 years. His body's starting to shut down a little bit. He's getting a little bit too old for that line of work. He doesn't have to do as many push-ups or sit-ups, or he doesn't have to run the 2 miles as fast. Okay? And I don't know what the PT test is today, but by the way, Molly is barking. Looks like the dog's next door. So bear with me as she starts complaining, just because she's here and they're over there. She always barks at him. Anyway, he goes on about how we can't have any more fat troops. Okay? Now, it sounds like he wants the outdated standard of, you can't have the appearance of being overweight. You got to fit the totally ridiculous body weight or body mass standards, right? Because you could have someone who is he might, for his height and weight, or for his height, be out of weight for regulation, be overweight. But they also do a tape test to measure if he's actually within the standard or not, and that tape test is not always accurate, right? Maybe this guy is just buff, maybe he's just jacked, and he doesn't make tape even though he is fit, right? Now, I don't know about you, but I want that guy around, right? If he can do the job, I want him. Now, as for the generals, right, because he's saying that having fat generals is a bad thing. Well, first of all, generals, they're up there in age, for one, and being up there in age often comes with a few extra pounds for a lot of people, right? And plus, it's not like generals are out there on the front lines, right? Generals are the strategists, right? The ones that are in the back calling the shots, right? But yeah, Whiskey Pete, who had never commanded anything larger than a platoon, which for those of you not familiar, a platoon is maybe 30 to 40 soldiers, right? So, a one-star general, right, is commanding no less than 3,000 troops. No less than that. But yeah, I mean, you get generals commanding tens of thousands of troops. And of course, admirals as well. Right? Tens of thousands. But, this guy, who was a platoon leader, and he even mentions that in his speech. Well, as a platoon leader, meanwhile, you've got some 3-star up there saying, yeah, well, as a corps leader, or some 1 or 2-star saying, yeah, well, as a division leader, yeah. I don't think a platoon leader. I don't think a platoon leader ought to be. I think he ought to be taking advice from these generals, not ordering them, right? Now, ultimately, the discretion is his and the president's, but when he knows that he doesn't know as much as they know, and that he hasn't been around as long as they have. He knows it. And yet he is still making demands of them, right? Telling them that, you know, what the standards are, and you know what, we're gonna, I'm tired of you not enforcing the standard. And we're gonna change basic training, you know, so that we can have shark attacks, which shark attacks, for those of you who don't know, is, in fact, especially on the first day of basic training, right? The drill sergeants just come out of the woodwork and they're just all over you, right? And like, for example, we had, when I was in basic training, right, we had our green duffel bag, and then most of us bought a black personal bag, you know, for all of our personal gear that we weren't allowed to have until after basic training was over. Okay? So, most of us had that. Not everybody bought a black bag because it wasn't required. Right? So, you know, drill sergeants would come in and give conflicting commands. And it was, for those of you who haven't been through basic training, it's a mental game, right? It is very much a mental game. They need to get inside of your head. They need to tear you down to build you up to what they need you to be. All right? So that's what they do. They tear you down in order to build you up. So Keg's Breath has decided that, you know, we can have these shark attacks, which I'm all in favor of the shark attacks. I mean, where I was going with the bags is, you know, one drill sergeant would tell everybody, put your black bag on the ground. So everybody who had a black bag would put it down. Now, some people held on to their green or blue or red personal bags, right? Some put their personal bag down, right? Because they were told to put their personal bag down, but they also specified black. And, you know, despite that one drill sergeant saying, put your black personal bag down, right? And holding on to your red or blue or whatever colored personal bag you brought with you, drill sergeant would get up in your face and ask why you are still holding your personal bag, even though it's a different color from the one that you were told to put down, right? And then when you do put that bag down, another drill sergeant would come up and say, he said to put down your black bag. Why is that red bag on the ground? So you'd have to pick it back up, right? Like I said, it's all a mental game, right? He also said that it's now acceptable to toss lockers and bunks, which, again, I'm okay with that, right? Because, you know, like, say, for example, your stuff is not secured, right? You don't put a lock on your locker. Your bed isn't made to standard. Toss it. Toss that bunk. Do it over. Same thing with your wall locker, if it's or your foot locker, if it's not secured. Toss it. You know, everything goes flying everywhere. In fact, when I was at Fort Gordon, Georgia, right, learning my MOS, Military Occupational Specialty, for those who are not in the know, which is basically your specific job, right? When I was at Fort Gordon, Georgia, I was a commo guy, communications. Uh, we came home from class, and we found one guy's wall locker had been tossed. I mean, stuff everywhere. He had shoe polish that was in there. You know, drill sergeant wrote on the floor in shoe polish some message about securing your wall locker, and you know, that may have been a little bit over the top, but generally I'm in favor of that. You know, in fact, I was never a drill sergeant, but I was a sergeant, and I have tossed lockers, right? Not very often, once or twice, but I've done it, right? And quite frankly, it's kind of fun, but but yeah. But the one that gets me is he says you can now put hands on soldiers, put hands on recruits. That has not been allowed for decades. Decades that has not been allowed. I mean, you might see like some of the old movies where, you know, a drill sergeant punches a soldier, right? That has not been allowed for a long time, and it does not need to be allowed. There's no reason for that. There's no reason to put your hands on a recruit. The only exceptions to that, are in extremely dangerous situations. For example, the rifle range and the grenade range, and you know, things like that. In fact, we were told very specifically at the grenade range that we are absolutely allowed to put hands on you if necessary, right? So basically, if you do something stupid, you know. And in that situation, fine, I get it. But just kind of as a, hey, you know what? You can put your hands on these recruits. That's a problem. That is a problem. I'll guarantee that there is a drill sergeant somewhere who heard that and will abuse that. They will hit the next recruit that they think they want to, you know, that they want to or they think they need to, right? That is not acceptable. And it hasn't been for a long time. But yeah, he goes on and lectures them, you know, about, you know, how we're the Department of War and all this, that, and the other. Silence. Silence. Not even a little golf clap. And then we get old fat boy Orange Man Donnie getting up there. By the way, you know, we can't have fat troops, but you know, we can have a morbidly obese commander-in-chief, right? Which, granted, I get it. You know, he's a civilian, always has been. But, you know, kind of hypocritical for some obese motherfucker like him to be going along with, you know, standards that he himself has likely never met. But he gets up there basically giving a campaign speech, right? He's talking about how, you know, Illinois has a stupid governor. You know, we want to go into Chicago, but their governor is stupid. and we want to go into Portland, and we're going to use our cities as training grounds for our military, right? And he goes on about, military legends and lore. L-O-R-E. They call it lore. Like these generals and command sergeants major don't know what lore is or how it's spelled. Something tells me that dumbfuck Donnie just learned a new word before going on stage, right? But the very first thing, he comes in and, out of respect for the office, everyone in the room is standing at attention. But there is no applause. There's just total silence when he comes in, right? Out of respect for the office and for their own oaths. And he comes in, well, that's the quietest that's the quietest room I've ever come into. And, well, you can applaud if you want to, you can do whatever you want, you can even get up and leave if you want, but if you do that, there goes your rank and there goes your future. Now, kind of sounded like a joke, but this guy is not good at delivering jokes. It might have been, but think for one moment that if somebody would have gotten up and walked out, that they wouldn't face disciplinary action. Think for one moment that wouldn't have happened. Yeah. But yeah, he's talking about how horrible our cities are and, how terrible Biden was. And, he starts rambling about paper, like signing their commissions and, how Biden signed them all with auto pen and I sign it with a regular pen because, and I get that nice thick paper, not that cheap paper that, dude, seriously, what the hell are you even talking about? He is rambling incoherently, like he always does. I am convinced that the guy has dementia. He shows a lot of signs of having dementia. Right? He may have Alzheimer's. I mean, dementia does run in his family. His father had dementia. He may very well have Parkinson's, according to some doctors. He is not in good shape. Between his physical health and his mental health and his steady diet of fast food and well-done steaks with ketchup, which, by the way, you wouldn't need ketchup on your steaks if you had them cooked correctly. Also, even a well-done steak shouldn't be done with ketchup, shouldn't have ketchup on it. And, by the way, chefs hate you. Chefs hate you. Because that is an insult. So, anyway. He goes talking, blasting the Democrats. And I think he's expecting a massive response because the military as a whole does support him, largely. A majority of the military supports him, but I don't think a majority of the generals do. Actually, I think a majority of the generals oppose him. I think most of his support comes from the enlisted side of things, right? Which, for those of you who are not familiar, right? Enlisted, that's your privates and your sergeants is the easiest way to describe it, right? Whereas your officers are your lieutenants, your captains, majors, colonels, and generals, right? And I can break it down more specifically than that, but you have Google, so you can figure it out. and by the way, corporals also on the enlisted side. So, but and I'm oversimplifying it, right? Oversimplifying things. So the enlisted side, obviously, there are a lot more than there are officers. And I think some of the junior officers are probably more inclined to support him, but the senior officers not so much. Senior NCOs are probably a mixed bag. NCO, non-commissioned officer, that's your sergeants. Your senior NCOs would be a sergeant first class and above, right? So, and in the Navy they call them petty officers. So, it's the same thing, just also I'm not familiar with their ranks, so don't ask me what their ranks are. Anyway, the generals and the sergeants major weren't having any of it. In fact, I saw a picture of that room where they all looked just annoyed at the fact that they were there. I mean, Kegsbreath basically gave a speech that could have been an email, right? Should have been an email, rather than gathering all of the top leaders from all over the world, putting national security at risk. Send an email. And when the President of the United States is giving basically a campaign speech and a threat to use the military to attack our own cities, they weren't having any part of it. So that is a reason for optimism. When he talks about going into Portland and going into Chicago, using active duty military, I have a little bit more optimism than I did. I have a little bit more optimism than I did based on that speech, because there was no reaction. No reaction at all. That's a good thing. I think that at least the generals and the admirals and the command sergeants major are going to uphold their oath to the Constitution and not swear an oath to the president. By the way, one more thing. When Kegsbreath was going on, and he said that, if anything I'm saying here, if anything I'm saying here upsets you, do the honorable thing and resign. No, Kegsbreath, you do the honorable thing and resign. Because there's nothing honorable about what you and the Cheeto-in-Chief are trying to do with our military and to our country. I'll see y'all next time.